Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have my first repeat guest, Steve Hall, who's a co-owner of Revive Stronger, a bodybuilder, and a physique coach. Thank you so much for being back on, Steve.
Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be the first repeat guest. Like you know, I am used to being on the other end of these, and I think you do a great job, Nikias, of asking great questions and keeping the podcast flowing. So yeah, it's good to be back.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So, dear listeners, if you haven't heard of Steve before, you can check out everything that he does in the show notes today, but also you can hear him for the first time introducing himself in episode 13, Fundamental Principles for Massing. Today, we're actually completely changing the topic because we're going to discuss mini cuts. And Steve actually has a group coaching program that provides or coaches people through mini cuts, and we'll discuss that at the end. So I just wanted to say that now because that goes to show that he clearly has a lot of experience with mini cuts. So he's going to provide a lot of value and information in this episode. To start with, Steve, I'd like for you to define, if you can, what mini cuts are and what they're for, what their purpose is.
Perfect. So yeah, mini cut is what it says on the tin. So it is a mini version of a diet phase. And in terms of like getting more into specifics, for me, it's 3 to 6 weeks because I feel anything longer than 6 weeks starts to approach just like a normal cutting length. It's no longer
Mm-hmm.
mini, but anything less than 3, I'm kind of like, did you really get any cutting done in that period of time? It's kind of just like so short. Did too much happen there? I think you probably could argue you could go a bit longer or a bit less. Like the time doesn't matter so much. It's a short dieting phase, but in most instances, 3 to 6 weeks, I think, kind of defines that quite well. Because it's 3 to 6 weeks, another kind of feature of a mini cut is that it's more aggressive than your typical dieting phase. So you are losing weight or rather fat at a faster pace during this period of time because you can afford to do it because you should be using it, as we're going to come on to in terms of like when to use it when it's appropriate, when you have a decent amount of body fat to lose. It's not like someone 6 weeks out from stage goes, oh, okay, for the final part of my stage prep, mini cut. It's like, ugh, you shouldn't be doing that. You should have plenty of body fat during this period of time because essentially another key feature of a mini cut is to extend a massing phase. I kind of see them as a way to potentiate even more massing because there can be a few reasons that you might enter it. One of them, as we were talking about off air, a reason I need to use mini cuts most of the time isn't because maybe my body fat gets a bit too far from kind of competitive levels or healthy levels for me. It actually is because I just get to a point where I can't eat anymore. My appetite is so bad, I'm force feeding, and I'm kind of sat in front of meals and feeling nauseous, which is just a horrible position to be in. So I jump into a mini cut. Good 3 to 6 weeks of kind of aggressive dieting does wonders for your appetite most of the time, and picks it right up, and it can buy me many more months of kind of good appetite gain to my nice gaining phase again. So that's one key reason. So it can kind of potentiate appetite, which again is a reason why they are for people who are in like a healthy state in their off season, eating plenty of food, because they are otherwise kind of like a rebound diet. Like I'm purposefully using it to rebound, to push my appetite back up. But for a lot of people, if they're already like, oh, no diets are working, maybe a mini cut's the answer. It's like, no, that's kind of like pouring gasoline on the fire. Like you've already kind of, you're struggling, and then you're trying to go with something that's even more aggressive than the things you've been trying. Probably not the right answer. So you need to be in like a good healthy position. You haven't dieted for a long period of time. You've been gaining for an extended period of time. So it's going to extend the period of time. Again, you can keep massing. So the other reasons kind of I kind of alluded to are body fat related. So as a competitor, say maybe I'm looking to compete next year. I'm like, right, I don't want to get too far away from my stage weight. So I'm going to use this just short mini cut to bring my body fat levels back down to buy me some a larger window of gaining. And then if for other people, it's just when you get for males approaching 20% body fat, which I always hate using body fat terms because they're such like arbitrary numbers, but I think a lot of people kind of understand where 20% is, where it's like you've not really got any muscle definition particularly. You kind of look quote unquote soft all over. You're approaching that level of body fat that starts to get kind of unhealthy, maybe towards like overweight, obese in terms of like BMI, and then also potentially accruing new body fat cells, stretch marks, those sort of things. So you probably want to cut down. Females can generally add maybe like 7% on top of that, which again, arbitrary numbers, but for females, it has many of the same features where they lose a lot of the muscularity shape that they necessarily have. And they just don't look like they train, if that makes sense. Like it's like, oh, like you've kind of let yourself go a little bit. You kind of want to avoid pushing that far. Females might be able to get away with being healthier at higher body fats actually, because just from a necessity standpoint, they have higher levels of body fat for like reproductive purposes. But still, it's probably wise not to get too far because ultimately, even if like the partitioning ratio's got debunked, where oh, if you're leaner, you'll gain more muscle than fat when you're in a surplus, doesn't seem to be so true. But it is true that if you kind of let your body fat levels get really high and you gain a bunch of muscle, if you have to diet down for kind of a year to get back to a level of leanness that's appropriate for you or your goals, you're kind of potentially losing quite a lot of that muscle in that time. And also, it's just time where you could have been staying a bit healthier or nearer your goal kind of body weight. So I think I defined it. So the time length, the aggressiveness, I guess in terms of aggressiveness, I would say on the high end, maybe for some individuals losing at 2% body weight per week, 2% of their body weight per week they could do, but I would say not much more than like the low end of the more aggressive you go, probably the shorter the mini cut, the less aggressive you go, probably the longer it can be. So if you're at 2% rate of loss, that's an aggressive, like a really aggressive deficit. You probably only sustain that for like the 3 week time period. And you probably want to be quite high up towards like your peak level of body fat, if that makes sense. And then anywhere from, I would say if you're going much slower than 1%, then you might consider, is a mini cut the right tool for you? Maybe you would just want to use like a longer, less aggressive cut. Anywhere from like 0.75% of body weight. Maybe that's like to the low end, losing 0.75% of your body weight per week. And it's going to like be an average. It's not going to, like, some weeks might be a bit more when you first jump into it. As you know, you lose that glycogen, that water. It's going to be a bit faster, and as you go through it, it may slow down. So you can really just base it off your numbers. I often look at, okay, so you're in your off season, you're gaining at maybe it's half a pound per week. That's theoretically a 250 calorie surplus. So maybe 250 away from the average calories you're consuming is your maintenance. And then, right, so what body weight do we want to lose? Maybe it's say a pound, just make it really easy math. Let's take 250 off. We're at maintenance. Let's take another 500 off. We're at roughly losing a pound per week. And maybe you you drop it another 100 because you're like, oh, there's going to be some adaptations and things. So let's just kind of
Hmm.
drop it down to preempt it. And then you can kind of set it and go. A lot of the time, because it's such an aggressive deficit, you don't have to worry about looking every week or every couple of weeks. Oh, am I losing at the right pace or whatever? It's like, if it's aggressive, you're feeling fine, you're holding your training, you're good to go through. So another, I guess, key feature of a mini cut, at least the way I use them, and I think it probably makes sense to do them, is to sustain lower average levels of volume. Because the reason for that is kind of twofold. One is when you're in such an aggressive deficit, it becomes so hard to recover from training volume. And so you probably can't do the same level of volume as you were doing when you were in your gaining phase. You've just got less fuel to be able to adapt and recover. And secondary to that, you actually get a bit of an opportunity to potentially reduce some fatigue and potentially reduce some kind of, I guess it would be termed adaptive resistance, potentially. And I'm saying potentially purposefully because we don't have strong scientific literature to back this up. We have some kind of literature we could support this argument with, kind of more of a hypothesis, I guess, where we could resensitize. So you basically get a bit of a recovery period where you're just training at lower volumes. Mini cut training's really quite boring for a lot of people. You're just looking to hold on to performance. You're not trying to gain muscle in this cut. You're just looking to hold muscle, drop fatigue, drop lots of body fat. And the analogy I often use is like robbing a bank. You wouldn't mess around wasting time. You would like rob that fat bank ASAP. So you want to get in and out as soon as possible so you can get back into your mass gaining phase. So I think I probably touched on a lot. I spoke a lot and hopefully covered the key features of what a mini cut is and when and who they might be appropriate for.
Absolutely, that was a brilliant answer. Thank you, Steve. So, my original question was what mini cuts are and what they're for. And I find what you've just said about the duration of it very sensible, particularly when you say if it's a lot shorter than 3 weeks, then are you even removing body fat? Because in the first week or two of a fat loss phase, you're going to lose quite a bit of water. So, those body weight losses that you're seeing, how can you know for a fact that that's body fat unless you're very very experienced and you know exactly your body is very very regular as well. And so in previous fat loss phases you've seen, okay, in 2 weeks I lose a pound, so if I'm losing more than a pound in these 2 weeks I know I've lost body fat. But that's really only possible for a very few select people. And with respect to the goals of a mini cut, then it sounds like it's to potentiate your appetite, I am, and other biofeedback in a massing phase, which I think it was important that you clarify that rather than say that it's used to potentiate muscle growth, because then people might think, oh, I do a cut, so then I gain more muscle after. No, that's not what you were trying to get across. It was more like gaining muscle for a prolonged period of time is in a surplus is stressful for the body, like a deficit is, and it can result in you not having an appetite at all and really struggling to get the food down. So you essentially, as you said, you buy yourself more time productively massing if you do a mini cuts. And you also discussed the fact that it could be helpful to maintain your body fat levels within a healthy range. And I thought it interesting that you touched upon how you don't like referring to body fat percentages. I find it particularly unhelpful, given that I coach a lot of gender diverse people, because when you're on therapy, on hormone replacement therapy, that's the word I was looking for, your body fat levels are going to be different than a cisgender man's or a cisgender woman's. So what I normally look at when I'm looking at, okay, what would be reference, a metric to use for reference to know when to potentially go for a mini cut. I would normally look at BMI in combination with usually waist measurements, because they seem to be the two together, used together, seem to be relatively well correlated to body fat levels that could be considered less or more healthy. And again, I also want to say that I thought that what you said then about the P ratio debate having been debunked, yes, I agree with the fact that you said yes, but you also don't want to put yourself in an unhealthy position in terms of body fat levels. And I think, just to add to that, if you get to a position where you carry so much excess body fat that you could actually be fall within the overweight or obese category, there are also other processes in the body that become dysregulated, and it's been shown in research that the muscle mass in people who live with obesity is less metabolically healthy than muscle mass in non-obese people. So yes, you could still put on muscle mass even if you were at that level, but it wouldn't be as healthy as if you were at a lower body fat level. And you also touched upon the characteristics of a good candidate for a mini cut, which was going to be my next question. And you brought up particularly you want to make sure that you have plenty of body fat, because this isn't a diet you want to do at the tail end of a contest prep for bodybuilding where you're basically thick skin lean, as they say, and you're going to risk losing muscle mass. So that's clearly one criterion. You want to make sure that you have a certain level of body fat to lose. And you also mentioned that you would want that person to not have dieted for a long time. Now, I was wondering, are there other criteria that you would consider when thinking, okay, might this client be suitable for a mini cut?
Yeah, I think that was really well stated because yeah, the way I view kind of body fat now in regard, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I don't really. I talk about these numbers are referenced, but like I said, they don't ultimately become super helpful. And often similar to you, I'm kind of looking for biofeedback from the client, how they're visually looking, and kind of other characteristics versus just this like body fat number as per se. But I do think about kind of this lower and upper intervention point in terms of for a long time there was kind of these, I guess, theories surrounding set points. Like some people are like, oh no, you're at this body weight, and whatever you do, if you go up or down your body weight, you always draw yourself to this. That kind of got debunked, and it was like, oh, maybe there's settling ranges. But I think most kind of people I follow in the evidence-based space have kind of settled upon, oh, actually there's probably like a lower and upper intervention point in terms of body fatness, where if you're at the upper intervention point, basically everything that you feel during a diet phase is like flipped on its head. So you have like severe, like no hunger, like actually you just become actually kind of similar to a diet, but in a different way. You become very kind of tired, lethargic. You just don't feel your best. Your body's kind of fighting you. It's like actually at this point you're getting like so over fat that you're not going to be able to like escape predators or whatever it is, like our like history of kind of trying to survive in this world. Which yeah, I mean the upper intervention point isn't as hard a ceiling for most people. For me, it seems to be a bit of a low ceiling that's quite hard, where I really can't push through it. A lot of people, I mean, we've got the obesity like epidemic to be able to suggest this, where people kind of float through that relatively comfortably. But the lower kind of body fat point, it's much more of like a hard wall where it's like, okay, this is what maybe bodybuilders would call the digging phase to try and get through that. So, in terms of like a prerequisite, it is that you want to be within this range and not towards the low end of it. Because if you try and like, I've done this before where I've been like, oh yeah, I'm going to mini cut because yeah, I've got plenty of body fat. And then like 3 weeks in, and I'm already like getting towards like contest prep levels of leanness. I'm like, this is dumb. Why am I doing this? You want to be towards the upper end of your kind of body fat in terms of the like intervention points. You want to be towards the upper end of your intervention points. You don't want to be towards the lower end. So that's kind of one, just to kind of clarify body fats. And that's going to differ towards person to person to some extent. Like I said, I'm someone who just, I have lower points where I stay a bit leaner and I feel comfortable there. Other people will be able to push higher. Some people might be able to push so high that they need to like create their own intervention point. So that comes in there. And then the other point was so levels of body fat, and then not having dieted for quite a while, which kind of the two sort of go hand in hand. But I think quite often, if they don't, then it's someone who's tried to diet when they're at higher levels of body fat, kind of hasn't gone successfully, and then they're trying to go again, which is just inappropriate. Which sort of brings me to the next point and prerequisite is elements of diet fatigue. If I use like a broad term for it, you don't want to enter a mini cut when you've got signs of diet fatigue, and that might even be things like food focus, like where you're preoccupied with food and food's delicious to you, your appetite's really high. If I mention the word like cut to you, if that brings like, I don't know, tears to your eyes and you're scared about it, it's like, oh my gosh, really? Clearly psychologically you've still got some diet fatigue there. You're not in a great place. And if you just maybe have a history of potentially like eating disorders, binge eating, this sort of thing, when you go aggressive approaches probably aren't for you. You probably need a slower approach. But that's very individual. I don't think there's any one, like, it's not like males, females, whatever, are particularly more suited to a mini cut. I've seen lots of people. I'm sure you've used mini cuts with your clientele a lot, and yeah, it's very individual, not like based off other characteristics out of just like general broader ones. So
Hmm.
I think they're the only ones that I would really consider.
That makes sense. I am thinking about a few others that aren't really physiological or history related, as in the history of a person, because so far you've mentioned all criteria that are either related to a client's personal history with dieting or with their physiology. What I'm thinking is, I think the listeners will have caught on by now that mini cutting is quite an advanced strategy for somebody who is really trying to take their physique, as they say, to the next level. Somebody who's quite serious about building a lot of muscle mass and losing body fat. So, potentially a criterion that I would consider is how experienced is this client. I would not take a client who's never done a longer dieting phase before. I wouldn't say never, but I would be, because I don't like to use absolutes actually, but I would
Good.
be unlikely to take a client who has never been able to successfully complete a longer dieting phase at a slower rate of loss through a mini cut, because I think that that would be too difficult for them if they couldn't, for whatever reason, stick to a less aggressive deficit for a longer period of time. I would be surprised if they were able to stick to a super aggressive deficit for a shorter period of time. What do you think of experience level of a criterion?
Yeah, it's a good one. I agree with you on this one for sure, and then I have another one actually that I've just thought of, and there might
Mm,
be it might be one of the ones on your list. Uh, so yeah, an analogy I kind of would that I've used before for this is it's a mini cut's like driving a Formula One car around a racetrack. Like that's way harder if you've only just learned how to drive and you're just like driving a, don't know, a Ford Fiesta and you've like just about got the hang of it, and then you're like, here's the keys to the like the Formula One car, like drive around the track. More likely you're going to crash and burn. It's not going to be a success, and that epitomizes kind of what you're talking about here, where like, if you have like it's for a skilled dieter who has lots of experience. It's not for the person who's just coming into it. Generally, like you said, I like that you kind of said you don't like absolutes because I agree with you. It's a very good idea, and the other one is, I guess, as a broader kind of term towards the diet fatigue, is also physiological fatigue. So, in terms of like if you're injured, these sort of factors, I mean, you shouldn't probably be dieting if you're injured and you can't train hard, those sort of
mhm.
things. Probably not a wise move for you. But yeah, you might have some more on your list. So, they're the only two, or one additional one that I had.
It's interesting that you mentioned injury and fatigue as well, fatigue of that nature, physiological fatigue, because it's circling back to what you said before, where you wouldn't want someone to diet if they're already very lean, to go through a mini cut if they're already very lean. Ultimately, if you can think of any reason why a very aggressive deficit could result in muscle loss, you're not in a position to perform a mini cut. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So then the next, however, oh, actually, I do have a point on the aggressiveness of a mini cut and how it might be inappropriate for a more beginner level client. I wouldn't want to discourage people from potentially starting a longer fat loss phase with a period of very aggressive dieting and then increasing the calories that you're consuming for the rest of the fat loss phase. Because for some people, seeing an initial committing to a very difficult period of a couple of weeks, maybe at the beginning of a fat loss phase, feels more exciting and more motivating, and they can actually stick to it if they know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, where they're going to increase their calories and decrease their rate of fat loss. And for other people, it's not so much the excitement of the experience, but potentially because they're dieting more aggressively, they're going to be seeing faster body weight losses on the scale, and that's going to be motivating for them, and that's what they need in order to be able to stick to the diet long term. So I want to make sure that I make this distinction, because if you are that kind of person, potentially it's not mini cut, it's simply a more aggressive beginning of a longer fat loss phase, and that might actually be more a good strategy for you.
Yeah, it's something I used to talk about. I guess it's like just terminology for the sake of terminology, where I have heard people say like you can't use a mini cut. I used to use a mini cut as an entry into a longer cut because I do think you can be more aggressive at the start of an extended dieting phase. For all the reasons you mentioned, you create buy-in and everything, and then it became. I guess it's just the fact that well, it's not a mini cut then; it's just a longer cut with a more aggressive start. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. Yeah, it's terminology, and I think actually that potentially brings up another person that it's inappropriate for. You will get people, I normally see this guys who maybe have high intervention points or like the ones that aren't really a hard stop, and they get way kind of over fat, let's call it. And then they try a mini cut. And I'm like, that's going to take more than 6 weeks to shift. So like that person probably wants that aggressive where they probably start a mini cut and they're like, probably not going to be enough time. Let's go into like a slightly less aggressive cut for the next 6 weeks, and maybe they do a 12-week cut in the end.
That makes sense. So basically, you wouldn't be a good candidate if you're trying to use a mini cut as a short-term fix to, let's call it a mistake, so to speak, that you made over the course of several months, because it didn't take you just 3 to 6 weeks to gain that much body fat, and now you're trying to fix it in 3 to 6 weeks. That is the definition of a quick fix, which you and I both know, Steve, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so your goal then is very important. The goal cannot be to fix an issue that developed over a longer period of time. And I also believe that it can't be aesthetic. You don't want to go through a mini cut necessarily to look better. And that's the only purpose, because then if one of the main reasons why you would do it is to potentiate a muscle gaining phase or a massing phase, why are you expecting to look better? The point of a massing phase isn't to look better at peak mass. It's to build muscle so that once you've lost the body fat, you have what you would consider a more aesthetic physique, if that is the kind of physique that appeals to you. So if you're using a mini cut to make yourself feel better about your physique, I don't know if that's the right kind of goal and the right kind of mindset to be in.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in that it can be dangerous when you use it as a want versus like a need. I kind of look at mini cuts as like you don't want to just want to have a mini cut. You kind of want to have to need the mini cut, because if you do it whenever you want to, that is where people get into this trap of mini bulk, mini cut, mini bulk.
Yeah.
It's like, your bulk should probably be like a good like 3, 4, 5 times as long as those mini cuts, because muscle growth for a natural is incredibly slow.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. You can get into this vicious cycle where every time you're just slightly bit uncomfortable with your physique, you do a mini cut, and then you're mini cutting for 3 weeks and mini bulking for 3 weeks. You've got to be in a surplus for a sustained period of time, or at least at maintenance, to say that you've built any level of muscle. If you're bulking for 3 weeks or massing and then mini cutting for 3 weeks, at the end of the day, you're gaining water weight and you're losing water weight pretty much.
It's like the epitome of a yo-yo diet, which yeah, you definitely want to avoid. And yeah, it's sad when you see people go through that, because by the end of it, it's like you could have probably just had a fun life eating at maintenance that whole time rather than having to like starve and stuff almost.
Exactly, only to be exactly the same at the end of the process.
Yeah.
The final criterion that I was thinking of was actually another physiological criterion, and it's related to somebody's size, and therefore I say size only because it's correlated to how many calories you are going to be able to eat. Because I don't know if, and I'm talking about this from the perspective of someone who's 5 foot tall. My calorie budget isn't going to be 3,000 calories per day. And if the mini cut is going to be very aggressive, then is it going to be a mini cut isn't meant to be sustainable, but if it's not even sustainable for the 3 to 6 weeks during which you do it, you're going to fail. So when I say sustainable, I mean in the very short term of the duration of the mini cut. I don't know if you're maintaining on a relatively lower amount of calories compared to somebody who's bigger than you or simply burns more calories than you, then a mini cut would be advisable. I'm thinking about smaller people like me, maybe smaller women, smaller people of any gender. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this one kind of flew into my head as we were talking before, and I I don't want to say like some people can't do it based off their body weight and their size, but I think you are like it's kind of similar to on average women will find dieting probably harder because they're just smaller and they burn fewer calories. And I mean, inherent to their kind of genetic makeup, they burn fewer calories than a male as well due to like their hormones and everything. So it is just inherently harder from that perspective. And same with someone who's smaller, even to the fact of for me, a mini cut is like I'm like prime candidate. I'm on my maintenance is very high, so getting into a deficit, it's like 2,500 calories is an aggressive deficit for me. For my business partner Pascal, 2,500 calories is like a small surplus. And it's just like, okay, so a mini cut for Pascal is actually a less of an appropriate tool. So for those individuals, it might be that, like you might say, okay, mini cutting isn't for you, or you might decide, right, actually, you might always want to go for the 6 weeks and do a slower rate because to lose at like a percent plus for you, or like 2%, is just like ridiculous. Like there's just, you probably wouldn't even be able to meet your protein requirements to be able to like get to that sort of level of deficit. So I agree with you. For some people, when you look practically and you look at the numbers and you work it out, you're like I get to eat like a piece of chicken every few hours and a slice of like cucumber, and how am I
Yes,
going to sustain my training or anything?
that's exactly the point I was trying to make, because I'm talking about from a purely practical perspective. Yes, it is short term, so it's we're not talking about this is your new lifestyle whenever you're losing body fat, but still, we don't want to lose any muscle mass. And from a purely practical perspective, if in order to be in an aggressive deficit, you need to eat 1500 calories or less in a day, that leaves you a lot less room for vitamins, minerals, protein, carbs, dietary fats, all the nutrients that we need to function optimally and to support training and general life, than if you were able to mini cut on 2500 calories or more. So I believe that there is that consideration. As you say, if I had a client who were a smaller size, I would consider, okay, if we ever wanted to do a mini cut, it would need to be on the longer end of it in order to reduce the size of the deficit, because practically speaking, you're not going to be able to have relatively good quality training on 1000 to 1200 calories for 3 weeks.
Yeah, um, it's I don't really have much to add on that. I think it's not said enough, because even I think some people feel like, I have clients who they have a background of even being kind of overweight and obese, and they're trying to lose weight. And the number of calories they have to consume to lose weight at the body weight at their activity levels, just on like math, when you math it out, it's like that doesn't make sense.
Mm-mm.
But it's because of that history that they've got with their background. And I'm not saying like they're breaking the rule of thermodynamics. It's just their body's ramped down to such a state that they like have to eat 1500 calories to lose at like 0.5% per week. It's like, well, this person's never going to be in a candidate to mini cut, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that's well said.
Thank you. And you also made a reference earlier as we were talking to, well, we both made a reference to people getting into a vicious cycle of mini cutting and mini bulking, which is a good segue into my next question, which is, assuming you know that you are the right candidate, and I mean, if you've been listening for the last half hour, now you will know if you are or not. How often would you, Steve, recommend doing a mini cut for the right person?
Good question. I would say I sorry, my dog's trying to get up onto my lap. Here we go.
That's fine.
So she loves to lick my hand, and eventually she'll come up onto my lap. So yeah, I think. Sorry, remind me of the question again. Now I've
No
lost track.
worries. Ada distracted you. All right, no problem. It was a little dog break rather than commercial break. The question was, for the right candidate, how often would you recommend doing a mini cut?
So this is something I tend to auto-regulate it. I don't have like, because people love black and white ratios of, okay, like 4 to 1 mass to mini cut, what have you. And I definitely think you want your favor heavily in favor of massing to kind of dieting. But I think they're best auto-regulated, because for some individuals, when they just follow like a straightforward ratio, it could end up that they diet at an inappropriate time, or they could have been better doing it a bit sooner. I think having a general idea of when you do it is a great idea. I view it kind of similar to um, maybe active recovery phases or deloads, where I don't pre-plan them and you must do one every 6th week, say. But I know on average with most of my clients, they need a deload every 6th week. And I know with the training that we're doing, we're going to accumulate fatigue at, if everything goes to plan, at a rate that means a deload in week 6 makes sense. So I might map it into their longer term plan of, okay, after 4 months for you, I think we're probably going to be at a point where we need a mini cut. But similar to that person who's going through their training, we might be in that 5th week and be like, Steve, I feel great. I can go for another week. I wouldn't go, you're deloading, the plan says it. I'd be like, cool, let's go for another week. Let's see how it goes and see how longer we can kind of continue to train well and not accumulate too much fatigue. And I think that's quite a nice, because that's like the training fatigue model in terms of accumulation to deload paradigms. it's kind of like mini cuts are almost the drop in fatigue to massing, where it's like, I don't know, appetite can be a fatigue marker. Obviously, you're pushing training volume very high. I mentioned with mini cuts, you generally bring training volume down on average. And so it's like, okay, so after maybe 4 or 5 months of massing, we had planned a mini cut. How do you feel though? Is your appetite still great? Physically, how are you looking? Are you a competitor? When are you stepping on stage? How far away from stage weight are you? These sort of factors. Because in some instances, I do this with myself regularly, where it's like I could do a mini cut because physically I'm very tired, but my appetite's still good. I feel good. Let's just take an active recovery phase, or an active rest, which is basically be a deload accompanied with a week off the gym, and then I get back into it because all I need is physiological kind of training fatigue reduction, whereas I don't need the hunger and appetite, body fat regulation. So that's how I kind of play it. Is I don't have a set kind of ratio that I want to see. I kind of will auto regulate it, and it depends on where the person's starting. A lot of the time, I frame it as like a competitor, but that competitor is coming from like their lower end of their kind of dual intervention model range. So they're maybe at, like, again, I'm going to use a number, 10% body fat, but that's maybe clear abs, maybe a few striations, lots of muscle definition. Most individuals are going to be able to be around that point as like their lower point, and then they have a huge window then to be able to gain up. And so that person who's starting down here might have 6 months before they need a mini cut. Whereas if someone is already at that point of 6 months, they might only have like a few months before they're hitting upon this ceiling up here. So the closer you get to that upper intervention point, the shorter your mass phases are going to be between mini cuts. And most people are probably not going to be able to get away with more than like 2 to 3 before it's like you're knocking upon that upper intervention point too often, and you just need a longer cut to bring you all the way down to this lower intervention point, so you can buy yourself much more massing time than these mini cuts are buying you. In a sense, that mini cut is buying you less and less mass time each time that you do it. I do sometimes see, and this is kind of like that mini cutter to mini bulker, where they're going up and down like this. Some people would again hold to those ratios, and they kind of all the weight they gained, they lose every time. So they're continuously coming down to this baseline. I don't think that's the most effective approach. I think when you zoom out, generally you should be kind of on, in the long run, your body weight should be trending up, probably your body fat as well, before you go bring it all the way down. I think that's probably the most effective approach. I'm not saying the other can't work, but when I talk about these things, I try and think about like the optimal approach you can take, and then everything between there can kind of slot in. So yeah, I guess my answer would be either kind of pre-planned idea of where that mini cut might land based off their where they are between their intervention points and body fatness and to their goals and things like this, and then we'll check as we're coming to it, is a mini cut appropriate, or do we want to keep pushing it? And that'll be based off maybe how fast is the rate of gain been. Maybe it's been really slow or on the slower end, or maybe it's been too fast. And it's like, man, you just need a longer cut at this point. So that's how I'll kind of base it.
I like the answer, Steve. It fits my bias because
Oh,
all
that's
of
good.
my coaching is individualized. So you're saying, well, I individualized the process, which is exactly what I would do. So, but jokes aside, thank you. Really helpful answer. Now, I do want to discuss setting up nutrition and training, which we've been making some references to without necessarily going into too much detail about either. So, with regards to nutrition, we know we need to get into a calorie deficit. We've been making some references to the rate of fat loss being more aggressive. In terms of how would you say, I can speak English, give me 2 seconds. The question is, when you're looking at rate of fat loss or weight loss rather, what are you looking at? What range are you considering?
So yeah, I referenced anywhere from 0.75 of body weight per week being the low end
Mhm.
to 2% on the very high end, with I think most people finding 1% to like 1.25% of body weight loss being the most comfortable. And I don't want people to think they have to be on one of these numbers. It might be that
Mhm.
you land within a 0.75 to 2% range, where at the start you're closer to 2%. As the weeks go on, that slows down because, like we said, there's glycogen water losses. You go more towards the other end of that. And again, you can kind of again look at your body weight, and I always use pounds. I don't know why, but what I might think of like a 180 or 100, say 150 pound person. They want to lose at 1% per week, so that's 1.5 pounds theoretically, and it doesn't work out perfectly in practice, but that's a 750 calorie deficit. So you kind of roughly work out where is where have they been gaining? So if they've been gaining, like I said before, half a pound per week, that's again theoretically a 250 calorie surplus. Take that away from their average calories, and then we would take away the 750 from their maintenance, and that would bring them down to a point of which they can start kind of dieting from. And again, you might round some of these up or down depending. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know you're in a big deficit, and if that looks like a big deficit to you, then spot on. So then that kind of sets your calories. Next, I would set your protein and fats from that. So I'd be setting, actually, I don't think you asked me about this, so I'm jumping the gun there. So the rate of loss between 0.75 to kind of 2% of your body weight per week. And you basically using that rough rule of thumb of on average, 1 pound loss per week is going to be a daily 500 calorie deficit to get that 3,500 calorie deficit for the week.
I'm just going to jump in to say that, dear listeners, if you're confused, you're wondering, how does Steve know that this rate of loss equals these amounts of calorie in terms of calorie deficit? Episode 3 of this very podcast will teach you all of the math that you need to know in order to work this out for yourself. So listen to that one. And now, Steve, you were starting on setting macros. Please continue, because that was going to be my next question.
Perfect. So yeah, once you have your calories, then I always like to prioritize protein and fats because they're based off your body weight in terms of how much you need in terms of like essentials, but also I guess essential for the goal at hand. So if we start with protein, just generally 1 gram per pound is a great place to be. Because you're in aggressive deficit, you could look to push that up a little bit higher. I can't say that's necessarily like necessary, but it might help with satiety. It might, especially if you're going to go for the aggressive diet, it might help with bolstering NPS and making sure that you don't lose muscle. So you might go up to like 1.2 grams per pound at that point. And then I always like to set fat at like the lowest that you can sustain because you need as many carbs during this phase to maintain your training as much as possible. Because it is such a short time, you might not have to worry as much. You could really lower your fats, but I still like not generally going for less than kind of 0.25 or zero point 0.3 grams per pound. Much less than that if you're sustaining it for a while and kind of it just makes me a bit uncomfortable thinking I don't know if you're going to be getting all your essential fatty acids and fat soluble vitamins and things like this. And you definitely want to pay attention to the fat intake. And I don't know, the number of people I've worked with, they're not that great at paying attention to that fat intake and where they're getting it from. So I think it's safer for most people to stick to that kind of lower end and then make up the rest of their calories from carbohydrates. And this is as much as like a kind of bring yourself back to basics period of time. And that's one of the benefits of it, again, where it kind of potentiates massing is when people get to this point, maybe where their appetite isn't great, their diet is looking like you look at it and you're like, man, I thought you were like, you took care of yourself and you're like a bodybuilder and like, you know, it's like, it's full of fruit juice, chocolate milk, like palatable foods to get the calories in. And of course the quantity makes up for the lack of like nutrient quality sometimes. But now it's nice because they get to get rid of, or at least I like it, because I get rid of all the frivolous stuff that I just need to get the calories in. And I can focus on fruits, veggies, whole grains, lean meats, like maybe some eggs and things to get my fats in, nuts, avocados. And yeah, I like it because it's like, oh, this is like how I used to eat, but when I started my mass phase. So it lets you focus on kind of the quality nutrition. And like you mentioned before, you have to, because if you eat the way you did in your mass and you just eat less of it, one, you're going to be starving, but two, you're going to start not covering your bases in terms of nutrients, micronutrients in that regard. So yeah, that's how I set calories and macros.
Thank you. That's perfect. And I like the reference you made at the very end to quality of food quality, because it made me think about how I view diet relative to how many to your calorie budget. Basically, my thought is that when you're at maintenance or even more so in a deficit, your deficit is the lowest amount of calories you're ever going to have. So that's where that's your baseline diet. And in my view, to help with satiety, but also to provide you with all the nutrients that you need, you really want to maximize the diet quality in a deficit. When you're at maintenance or in a surplus, that's when your calorie budget is larger. So as long as you have this baseline diet in place where you're hitting all of your minimums for general health and for performance, then you can add some extras like those more higher palatable choices that you've mentioned, like chocolate milk or a cookie or other foods like that, where the point isn't necessarily to get a lot of nutrients from them, but maybe they have other uses, like you need the extra calories for your goal, or you need the overall diet to be less satiating, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to eat the calories that you need to eat. So I just wanted to point that out, because I think that um, when we focus too much on calories, we lose sight of how important diet quality is. And I do believe it's fundamental to make fat loss phases easier, but also to make maintenance and surplus phases easier. And also, and most importantly, to improve your quality of life. Because if your body is healthy, it is going to respond better to training, nutrition, to anything you try to do. And even outside of fitness, it's going to respond better to any stress. So if you set up your diet to nourish your body, that's how you're going to achieve a healthy and functioning body.
Yeah, I think it's really well said because that's why I like it because it brings me back to when I first got into like bodybuilding and nutrition. It was focusing on kind of quality nutrition and everything, and I really enjoy that aspect of bodybuilding. But I can't hold on to that in my mass phases, otherwise I don't gain the weight that I need to gain. So you kind of climb this hedonic staircase. You get to tastier and tastier foods, and then when you mini cut, and I've seen, and I always tell my clients basically run through what you said there, where it's like don't just like eat the same foods you've been eating and have less. You need to rethink like your diet completely. Like fruit juices are out the window. Eat the whole fruit, things like this. So yeah, I think that's very well stated. And it, again, like if it fits your macros, obviously became very popular for good reason because like you can change body composition and like as long as you hit your macros. But that does miss like I think a long term aspect in terms of health, well being. If you're not getting those micronutrient fundamentals, your immune system's not going to be functioning as well as it should do. Maybe you get ill more regularly. You don't sleep as well potentially. So yeah, I think that's very well stated.
Awesome. I'm glad that you agree. I always like when people agree with me. Now, we've talked about calories and macros, and we've discussed nutrition at length, I believe, at this point. So, moving on to the topic of how to set up your training, something that you have mentioned a couple of times is the expectation that perhaps you may want to lower your training volume. Could you speak a bit more about that and about any other adjustment that you would potentially consider making to a training program?
Yeah, fantastic. So I think the fundamental thing that I think everyone should consider in a mini cut is that we're just trying to maintain muscle mass. We're not trying to grow muscle mass, and so that kind of sets what you're trying to do within your training sessions and what you should do from like a construction of your training perspective. The details within that are more of my preferences and kind of some, I guess, like hypotheses surrounding what might be best to set up training afterwards. So, in terms of where kind of training volume should be, which is I think that's what it comes down to as the main criterion, is I view volume. And the more I say this, the more I don't like the term, kind of similar to body fats, is number of hard sets. I think that does a great job in many instances to tell you kind of where you should be with your volume, but when people then look at like a squat versus a leg extension, I'm like, well, that's not like one for one. You wouldn't want to do 10 sets of squats per week, probably, but 10 sets of leg extensions, wouldn't be a bad deal. Probably a mix of both. But regardless, I'm getting off track. When we're considering set volume, number of sets close to failure, you basically want to be at what I would term it from Mike Israetel, minimum effective volume, which is where I advise people to start their week one in a mesocycle after a deload. And that's probably going to be your maintenance volume during the mini cut because now you're in aggressive deficit, muscle protein breakdowns elevated. So what was once growing you is now just maintaining you because you've upregulated muscle protein breakdown. So to have grown in a mini cut, you'd have to probably bolster training. And again, we're not trying to do that during the mini cut. It's for fat loss, efficient fat loss. We're not trying to achieve multiple goals at this time. It just becomes very challenging otherwise to do so. And plus, you're in aggressive deficit. To do that level of volume, you might not even be able to recover from it. So it might put you into a really sticky situation. So MEV, minimum effective volume, is the most important factor. And then some other considerations I like to make is to constrain rep ranges. Because we're in such an aggressive deficit, higher rep ranges just become incredibly fatiguing because we haven't got the glycogen stores for them. And secondary to that, I like to constrain rep ranges to just give us potentially avenues for novelty coming out of this phase. So if we constrain rep ranges to the highest 15 down to 5, I kind of like that. I think it's a good rep range to work within for the mini cut, and it opens up opportunities afterwards. Again, it's more of my preference in theory, more than like this is something you must do. And then apart from that, there's not a whole lot extra that I necessarily think needs to change. Apart from the other thing is on a week to week basis, during general mesocycles, I like people to start out at meeting this kind of minimum threshold for growth in terms of relative intensity, which is like a 3 or 4 RAR. Maybe some movements could even be at 2 RAR, so close to failure, but plenty far enough away that's not generating lots of fatigue. I still like people to start that for their mini cut, but typically in a mass, I'm like, right, so you have that baseline. Now, next week, try and beat your performance by a small amount of load or an extra rep. Whereas in a mini cut, if you keep trying to have that progressive overload fashion that you have in a mass, you're suddenly going to hit a wall where you're like, oh shoot, I'm at 0 reps in reserve or failure, and I'm in week like 2 or 3 of my mini cut. So because your fatigue generated each week is so high, you might just repeat performance each week. Like literally, like week 1 was 100 for 10, week 2 could be 100 for 10, 100 for 10, and you're actually getting closer to failure just due to accumulated fatigue from the diet.
Hmm.
Now, that's on like the extreme case. Most people can maybe like beat performance every other week, but just know your progressions are going to be slower, and don't kind of put loads of pressure on yourself. This is also a nice break psychologically from training, at least I find, where in my mass gaining phases, I'm like, every week I've got to beat performance, and I put this pressure on myself to perform. Whereas in a mini cut, it's quite nice to just be like, so long as I just meet my thresholds for growth, I know I'm maintaining my muscle. And then you don't have to worry so much, which is nice also because the stimulus side of the equation in terms of like those pumps you get in the gym and like the disruption and fatigue within muscles starts dropping, so you don't feel like you're getting good sessions in. So I kind of see training, and this is almost the only time I ever like viewing training like this, is just like tick a box to tick, get the job done, don't worry about it so much. So yeah, that's how I kind of view training.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm glad that we brought this up, because I think that when a listener hears about minicuts for the first time in this podcast, they might think, oh, it's very aggressive, so the diet is aggressive. Therefore, the training program must be really hard to maintain all of your muscle mass as well. Whereas what we're saying is the diet is going to be aggressive, that's true, but training, if anything, may need to be less aggressive than it would be if you were at maintenance or in a surplus or even in a less aggressive deficit, because we don't need that much volume to maintain our muscle mass, which is the goal of training during a mini cut. And most importantly, doing too much might result in you digging yourself a hole where now you might actually be, in quotes, overtraining. So training so much that the fat loss phase becomes a drag and you're not able to sustain it. And potentially, if you do sustain it, in the worst possible case scenario, you might even lose a little bit of lean mass because you're training too hard. So I think it's very important that you made that distinction that yes, the diet is meant to be more aggressive, but training needs to support the amount of stress that you are receiving from the diet. It's not meant to add extra stress.
Very, very well stated. Um, and that brings back to the whole philosophy behind a mini cut, is that it's meant to potentiate a mass. So if you're dieting for like, if you're like tempted to diet on the aggressive side and, oh, I'll just do another week because you get the taste of seeing your abs or like leanness come through, but your fatigue is generated is starting to really get high. It's like, actually, the whole point of that mini cut is to kind of drop massing fatigue. So that's why training shouldn't be so aggressive, and that's why you don't want to push the mini cut so long that by the end of the mini cut you're like a zombie and you're like, oh, I have to go to a mass now. You should be able to jump right back into your mass. You shouldn't lose any strength. You should be like in a position to perform. It should set you up, potentiate the massing, not you need a whole nother mass to gain back the strength you lost in your mini cut. It's like, why did you do the mini cut again?
It's
Step up
like
massing.
exactly. It brings to mind something that I thought of at some point. It was an old mistake I made, and something that a client reminded me of because they asked a similar question, where when you deload and you don't go to the gym as often, you don't train as hard, and then a client asked me, well, what do you think about me adding more cardio then? And it's like, so you're deloading to remove fatigue, and now you're going to add new fatigue from cardio that you don't normally do, so you're going to potentially be very sore entering the new mesocycle, and you think that that's a good idea?
This that almost exact example happened to me with a client. He didn't ask. He just went ahead and did more hiking and more of his like dance classes and stuff. He was like, Steve, I thought I was meant to feel recovered after my deload. And I was like, well, you would have if you didn't add in loads of extra stuff. You kind of have to deload everything in life if you're going to get the recovery because, as the saying goes, stress is stress is stress. So, yeah, I see that same example a few times.
Yeah, sorry, I digressed, but back on track. What you mentioned at the end was that you said you should be able to go straight back into a surplus afterwards. That leads to my question, which is, so when you're done with the mini cut, how would you set up training? Would you deload and go right back into a surplus? How would you approach that phase, that transition?
Yeah, perfect. I think a lot of people are unsure what to do at this time. So, the safest thing to do is take a week off and take a deload week, not a week off. It could be a week off, but generally, I think deloading is a safer approach where you go and do very easy training essentially
Hmm.
and come to new predicted maintenance. The shorter and less aggressive your mini cut was, the closer this maintenance is going to be to where it was before. The longer and more aggressive it was, the more weight you've lost, the more adaptations you might have seen to this new body weight, where your
Hmm.
maintenance, where for me at least, when I go into a mini cut, I'm like 3,700 calories maintenance, which is, I know, absurd. And then by the end of my maintenance is like 200 calories less, predicted at least. And then I start seeing some adaptations coming back up as I push body weight back up. So you can kind of bring it to a new predicted maintenance, which you mentioned a podcast where you can probably listen to get an understanding of where that might be, episode 3.
Yes, well
Yeah,
done.
listen to this one. And so that's the safest method, is just take a week to deload, come to maintenance for that week, and then move yourself into a surplus afterwards, which just a moderate surplus of somewhere around 300 calories is appropriate for probably the vast majority of individuals. And but there can be instances where, again, because we're taking training quite easy and you're in kind of a low fatigue state, you might not even, and this is for those, for people more advanced, which a mini cut is for anyway, but for people who really understand their fatigue. So sometimes I'll do like a 3.5 week mini cut where I then, for the second half of that week, I'll deload, come to maintenance, and then I'll get into a mass straight after that. So you don't necessarily have to take a week long deload every time. What we're trying to do is just drop fatigue, maintain fitness, so our performance can be back in a good place. Because the kind of training volume is so low during a mini cut, if you do a short one that's not super aggressive, you might not need a full week of deloading. Again, the safest thing, if you're not sure, take a week is never really a bad thing to do. But for those who maybe are like, oh, I'm going to do a like 3.5, like Steve did it, you could probably just take a half week deload and get straight into things. I kind of sometimes wonder if I should mention deloading anything less than a week, but I like to bring it up because a lot of the times when people hear these things, as we've spoken about before, like they like ratios, like harsh numbers. And actually, what I like to bring people back to is what we're trying to achieve with these things. A deload isn't like, the goal of a deload isn't to deload for 7 days, it's to reduce the fatigue and to buy us another kind of block of hard training. If you can reduce that fatigue in a short period of time because you haven't accumulated as much, then you can get back into things. It's kind of similar if you ever have clients who go on holiday, maybe like halfway through their mesocycle, and they go away for 3 or 4 days. It's like, oh, you've actually probably dissipated all the fatigue you accumulated in that first bit of the mesocycle. You could restart your mesocycle probably because you're in a great position to restart. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of how people can go about it. Safest thing: deload, maintenance, straight back into a surplus. Make some good considerations, especially if you've lost quite a bit of body weight, that your maintenance might have shifted down, so you eat a bit less. And then, as any hopefully people are doing, they're weighing themselves, taking average rates of kind of change week to week, using that as a proxy for where the energy balance is, and then can make changes to their calorie intake according to that.
Perfect. Thank you for the answer. Now, I'm aware that we're coming up to an hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have a few minutes for a final question, or do you have to go?
No, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so the final question is, we talked about training and nutrition. I'm thinking to ask you, how would you set up cardio or a step count or physical activity for the purpose of increasing the size of the caloric deficit? Do you use that tool at all, or during a mini cut, do you focus primarily on getting the caloric deficit from the diet?
Really good question. This is quite a, I guess, nuanced thing to think about, but it's great because you already brought up the example of your client wanting to add cardio during the deload. This is somewhat similar to one of the secondary goals of what a mini cut is trying to do, where we're trying to reduce fatigue. So anything that's going to increase fatigue, such as cardio, we are actually try and avoid it if possible. That's the ideal scenario. And this is why mini cuts, people like myself are blessed in some ways for mini cuts because I'm on high calories. I wouldn't need to add cardio anyway. It just wouldn't be necessary. I can get into an aggressive deficit. But some individuals, like you mentioned, the smaller individuals who just have lower maintenance calories, to get into such an aggressive deficit, they might have to play with the other side of the equation and increase the energy expenditure. And they would need to add cardio in that case or increase steps, just a way to increase that side of the equation in terms of energy expenditure. So, generally, in the lead up to a mini cut, I might get someone to start monitoring their step count. And if they're very low, like I generally in an off season, even I like people to stay above 5,000 steps a day because I'm like, man, that's really sedentary if you're below 5,000. So I like them at least above 5,000 anyway. But if their step count is maybe at 7,000 and they're on plenty of food, then I'm like, right, we can just maintain 7,000 steps during the mini cut because you might subconsciously reduce that if you weren't measuring it. Or they might be on not that much food, or say, Steve, like, I would like to not be on so little calories. I'm like, okay, maybe we could increase that to 10,000 if that's appropriate for your lifestyle. Or it might be someone who, again, like we kind of talked about before, they're on the calorie deficit that they need is means they're eating such little food. I'm like, we probably need to incorporate some actual cardio as well because that's a more efficient way to burn the number of calories you need to. I can't get you doing 20,000 steps wearing a weighted vest or something to get the required calories. That would be a bit crazy. Or maybe someone just wants to do the cardio. I'd always encourage them to do a lower intensity form of that. So it would be like a fast paced walk, something that's going to be have less interference with their weight training and produce less fatigue. Because if you start incorporating things like HIIT, high intensity steady state, steady state, high intensity steady state cardio would be hell. HISS, HIIT, high intensity interval training, that's going to produce a lot of fatigue. And it's like, wow, that could really start having an interference effect to your training. And the training is what's maintaining the muscle. So focus on that and let the diet do the work for the fat loss. So my philosophy in general is trying to make the diet do the work, try not to add any cardio. If we are, focus on steps first, and then maybe steady state, kind of lower intensity stuff if we need to go there.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that answer. And I think we've covered minicuts in as much depth as I could think of. So thank you very much, Steve. In summary, minicuts are potentially more of an advanced tool, and the purpose of them is to help you be in a better position to continue gaining muscle mass in a caloric surplus. So you don't want to use them as quick fixes, and you also want to be in a physiological position where you have enough body fat to lose during a mini cut due to its aggressive nature. And we also made the distinction that the diet is meant to be aggressive, but training is meant to support you and maintain muscle mass. It's not meant to dig a bigger hole than what the calorie deficit is already creating. And similarly, that's the approach you want to take to physical activity outside of training. You can use it as a tool, but you don't want to create so much stress and fatigue that you put yourself in a more difficult position to have a successful mini cut. Steve, do you think that that's a good summary, or do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was great.
Perfect. So before we go, please let the listeners know where they can find you. Plug anything you like the mini cut movement I referenced at the beginning, and I'll make sure to put everything in the show notes.
Thank you very much, Nick S. It's always great chatting to you, and it's been cool to talk about mini cuts. It's been a while since I've actually spoken at length about them. And yeah, I get actually you did a great job. We do a terrible job of advertising the mini cut movement, so we do have that available. You can actually join it anytime. We don't have like I don't know people starting at the start of like May or anything like that. It is you can join at any time, and it is I think it's an 8-week course, but there's like a intro week, and then we also like we talked about how to kind of exit a mini cut. We help you on the exit too, so it's the 6 weeks if you want to take it for that long. That's available. There is also kind of support and educational videos alongside. They get kind of training taken care of, nutrition taken care of in terms of like spreadsheets. It does all the math for you. So if you listen to some of the equations or things we were talking about there and you're just a bit lost, You just enter in your numbers. It kind of manages it all for you as best as possible. And then we have our kind of group support network in the Facebook group if you need help with that, which is available. I think it's £99, so it's nothing too expensive. Perfect time for summer now, so it's a good timing actually. You shouldn't be doing it from a want. It should be a need, unless you want to give us some money, and then we'll take it. So that's available, which is on revivestronger.com, and Nikias will probably link that for you. And if they want to kind of reach out to me or find out more about what I'm doing, Revive Stronger on Instagram is the place I'm most active. And again, revivestronger.com has our podcast, our coaching, any kind of things that you want to learn about. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on.
No problem. Thank you so much for being on. And dear listeners, by this point, you know that you find my links in the show notes. So if you want to connect with me, to apply for coaching, that's where you've got to go. For now, I really want to thank you, as always, for lending me some of your time today. And until next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.